Okay, we're going to be learning now the Gemara for Sanhedrin Chelek, that page 110a. Let's bring up the page here. Hold on. Here it goes. We're in the middle of learning about the story of Korach, the rebellion of Korach in the desert after the story of the spies. Korach demanded to be a position of leadership. He was rebelling against hold on. He was rebelling against Heavi, holding page 110a. So he was rebelling against Moshe and Aaron's leadership. So we're middle of the story here. So it says that Vayikumu lifnei Moshe, they stood up, they rose before Moshe, V'anoshim mipnei Yisrael, and from the Jewish people, Chamishim u'masayim, 250 people that joined specifically this rebellion. And the Gemara says, Miyuchadim Shve'eda. They were distinctive people of the community. They weren't just anybody's. They weren't, so to say, like you say, low lives. They were respectable people of the community that rebelled against Moshe. Kriyei Moyed. What's mean Kriyei Moyed? So to say, they were able to read the time. Shahayu Yoidim la'aber shanim v'likvaya chadashim. They were studious enough, and they were Talmudic scholars to the extent that they knew exactly how to make a leap year and to establish the months, which are complicated laws. Anshe Shem, people with name, Shahayu lehem Shem b'chol olam. Their name was known all over the world, so throughout the world. So meaning to say that these were from the respectable people that rebelled against Moshe Rabbeinu. So the Torah continues, and the Gemara continues telling us the story. So when they came to rebel against Moshe, asking Moshe, everyone is holy. What's this idea that you and your brother have taken leadership? So it says when they came to Moshe, it says Vayishma Moshe, he heard, Vayipal alpanav, and he fell on his face. So the Gemara asks, Ma shmu hashama, what did Moshe hear that caused him to fall? So here we have this the crazy Gemara that says that Amar Reb Shmuel bar Nachmoni, Amar Reb Yonasan. Reb Shmuel, the son of Nachmoni, said in the name of Yonasan, Shechashaduhu mi'eshes ish. They cast accusations. They suspected him of being involved with other people's wives, with married women. What's the verse to support that? It says in Psalm 106, Vayikanu l'Moshe b'machna. They were jealous of Moshe in the camp. And the word kina is the word used when there's a sota, when there's a rebellious woman. It says that the husband is jealous of his wife. And the jealousy, they're saying, was about Moshe, that they suspected the wives to have relations with Moshe. Well, Omer Reb Shmuel bar Yitzchak, and Reb Shmuel bar Yitzchak adds to this. Malamed comes to teach us. Shekol echad ve'echad kines ishtem Moshe. Each person went and told his wife, like the laws of Sota, I forbid you to be alone with Moshe. Kina is the term used for Sota. Shenemar, and here there's two explanations to understand this statement. Also, the timing is a little challenging. It says we learn at the end after the golden calf, after the golden calf, and Moshe Rabbeinu destroys the golden calf, and he tells them the punishment that's going to happen because of building the golden calf. The Torah tells us in Parshas Kisisa, it says, that Moshe took his tent, meaning his home, and he took it outside the camp. He moved his tent outside the camp. Now, if you learn Rashi and Chumash, that happened right away, and that only happened until the Mishkan, which means from 17th of Tammuz until Moshe came down and they built the Mishkan the following year, or Rosh Chodesh Nisan. So it's seemingly less than a year. But here the Gemara learns that there's two explanations. One is that he moved his tent out of the camp because they were suspicious that Moshe was having relations with their wives. So he said, if that's what you think of me, he moved out of the camp. Or another explanation is because he was kind of isolated outside the camp, and the woman would go to Moshe to ask him questions like everyone would ask questions. So they were suspicious. What's Moshe doing outside the camp? And also you have to remember that Moshe, we learned in the Parsha before, in I think it was Bahaloscha, that Moshe separated from Tzipora. So they were saying Moshe is no longer with his wife, and there's no possible for him not to have relations. So they suspect him with their wives. That's what the Gemara teaches us. So Rashi says, "Kina liishtai." What does it mean that they were jealous? But it means to say the laws of Sota. They would tell her, "Al tistri Moshe. I forbid you to be alone with Moshe." Kinui haini asro, because we know that we learn in the laws of Sota that when it says jealousy, it means that it's a warning the husband gives to the wife. So Rashi learns, like the explanation, but not to like that because they were suspicious. Again, the timing is a little off. Because why is the timing off? Because if you learn Chumash and Rashi, so Moshe took his tent out after the 17th of Tammuz when the Jewish people built the idol, the golden calf, and it was only there until Rosh Chodesh Nisan, the following year when they built the Mishkan. And that was the Ohel Moed. That became the Ohel Moed. So you have to remember the way the Jewish people, nothing's changed in 3,000 years. The ideas haven't changed. So they were suspicious. They looked at Moshe, they bowed to him. The Torah tells us the story that when he would go to the Ohel Moed, they would see literally as Moshe went into the tent, the presence of God would come into the tent. But that didn't stop people from being suspicious. And at the same time Moshe was in the tent, he was having relations with their wives. So that's according to the opinion that he had the tent because that's what they're suspicious. According to Rashi learns that he left the camp because of that. So again, the story of Korach definitely happened after the building of the Mishkan. It happened after the story of the spies. So it's not, the timing is not exactly so simple. But here it says v'natulei michutz l'machna. So Rashi learns yotze michutz l'machna shleich shuti yoid. Moshe got so offended that they were suspicious of Moshe having Hayeshuki on page 110a. We're continuing the story of Korach, that they were suspicious of Moshe of having relations with their wives. They said, if that's the case, adios. He moved his tent outside. He moved outside. So let's see, Reb Shneim Dustin, I'm going to read some of the Mefarshim on the side that I have here. The early commentaries discuss the suspicion and ask what led the sages to arrive to this interpretation that they were suspicious. I mean, what basis? It says that Moshe heard and he fell on his face. What's the sign to tell us that because that they're suspicious of relations? Maybe there was other things they said. So some explain this is an allusion, as the sages say with regard to the verse, he who commits adultery with a woman lacks understanding, is lacking das. That one who assumes leadership over the community, if he is motivated by his own ambition and is not doing so for the sake of heaven, is likened to one who commits adultery. So it wasn't that he suspected him of having adultery. They suspect him being a person who has no das, who is not taking leadership for the right reasons. This is the meaning of the statement in the Gemara that they suspected him of adultery. They questioned the motivation behind this assumption of leadership. So says Rabbi Chia Rafeh. The plain meaning of the Gemara is that the suspicion was aroused because Moshe's tent was pitched outside the camp. So this is not what Rashi says. Rashi says that he left the camp because of the suspicion. But there's other opinions that say that because his tent was out of the camp, that's why they were suspicious. And he stayed there alone without his wife because Moshe was separated from Tzipporah. And God told him to separate from Tzipporah. It says after Mount Sinai, it says, we learned this in the Gemara in many months ago, that Moshe told everyone to go back to their tents. God said, you stay with me. From there, Moshe knew he had to stay away from his wife. And that's what God tells Aaron and Miriam, that I told him to separate from his wife. Among those who went there were the women of Israel, because he had his tent outside, who came to seek the word of God. To rebuff that claim, the verse in Exodus stated that Yeshua, his servant, never moved from his tent. So the fact that he had an attendant always by his tent, and the Torah tells us that didn't concern anyone. So there's no way that Moshe was alone with the women, but they just were suspicious anyways. In other words, Moshe was never in a seclusion with these women, the Riyaf says. Some explain that the verse about Moshe pitching his tent outside the camp is stated after the sin of the golden calf. The sages say that the women refused to contribute their jewelry to the efforts to craft the calf. As a result, the men claim that the women would obey Moshe more than they would obey their own husbands. Others say even worse. They add to that when they asked for money for the golden calf to build an idol because the men couldn't handle it, they said no, the women were faithful. And then Moshe said to build the Mishkan, it says the woman came running with the gold. So a normal person would be, at least my wife is normal. At least she's a giving woman. No, they right away suspicious. And when I asked for gold to build a golden calf, less than 40 days after the Moshe gives us the Torah, that the women are strong. But when Moshe asked them to give money for the Mishkan, all of a sudden they're giving. That must mean they're having a relation with Moshe. Okay, but that's basically, I mean, but that's the explanation is given, that the question is really the timing in the Torah doesn't exactly align with what we're saying here. If you want to say that because that the tent was out for a while even after they built the Mishkan, then the suspicion was that when he was alone after. But if he left because of the suspicion, the leaving of this was definitely on the 17th of Tammuz before that. So it seems like the timing is a little off, at least the way it is in the Torah. But of course, this is the Medrash. And however you look at it, the suspicion had no basis. Surely because Yeshua was always next to Moshe, so he was never alone. But again, that didn't stop the people from the people that like to stir rumors, right? Rumors, so they didn't stop them from setting rumors against even Moshe Rabbeinu. The Moshe Rabbeinu had to put up with a lot of garbage. He's not only suspicious with the wives. It's saying in Pekude, when he gave a calculation and accounting of the money, again, building the Mishkan to atone for the Jewish people's sins of building golden calf, they suspected Moshe of taking some money on the side. Again, this is what Moshe had to deal with for 40 years. Again, nothing's changed. Unfortunately, pretty much say what Rabbi Steinzut says. Okay, let's go further. So the story tells us like this: Moshe, so the rebellion wasn't just by Korach. The rebellion was also by people like Dasan and Aviram, which were again seasoned troublemakers from already in Egypt. Moshe had to deal with them. They were the ones who told Paro that Moshe killed the Mitzri. He had to run away to Midian because of Dasan and Aviram. You think Moshe would leave them in Egypt, right? They were bad seeds. Moshe took them, they were trouble until they were swallowed up by the earth. So it says, Moshe doesn't hold a grudge. He goes to Dasan and Aviram to face them. Rish Lakish says this comes to teach us a lesson. A person shouldn't stay in an argument. A lot of times we feel that we're right. Moshe was right. It wasn't like Moshe was wrong. Moshe didn't do anything that God didn't tell him. They would stop making trouble. And Dasan and Aviram were troublemakers. They were seasoned troublemakers. So Moshe knew that they were wrong, and the suspicion of the wives was wrong. All this was wrong. But it didn't stop Moshe from going to see them to try to put down the rebellion, because from this we learn a person shouldn't be involved in machlekes. That's how important it is not to be involved in disputes. The Amar Rav says, Kol hamachzik machlekes over belav. And where do we learn this from? From this story, that a person who remains in a state of a disagreement, an argument, the person who's about machlekes. Machlekes doesn't just mean you're not allowed to have a disagreement with someone. It's okay to disagree on ideas. Machlekes means a total, when there's a shul, everyone gets into a fight. A fight means it's more than just a disagreement. So Rav says whoever stays in such a situation of a machlekes is transgressing a violation. And where did we learn this from? From this story, the Torah says, don't be like Korach. And what is included when it says, don't be like Korach? Don't be a person involved in machlekes. Right? We have the famous Mishnah in Pirkei Avos that says, a machlekes l'shem shemayim, and you have to ask yourself a million times if it's l'shem shemayim, if it's really for the sake of heaven, is Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, or Shammai and Hillel. And a machlekes shelo l'shem shemayim is Korach. Means it wasn't for the sake of heaven, although they came with all their explanations, and we learned that they were pious people. That's how Oim ben Pelas's wife saved them, because she revealed her here and they ran away. So in their kind of pretending and masquerading as holy people, or confusing themselves that they were holy people, they were machlekes. They were people of machlekes. Rashi says, "Mekan she'ein machzikin machlekes." From this, we learn a person shouldn't be involved in. So you see the word. Dispute. It's more than dispute. Shemachal akvaydim. What do we learn from Moshe? That Moshe was, he forgave his own respect. And it was so important for him to get rid of the machlekes. So that he went himself to go try to make peace, to figure it out with Dasan and Aviram. The Gemara, of course, tells us that they didn't listen. They didn't want to go see him. Right? People that have no real cause, right? They're not ready to have a conversation. They just like to shout and make noise. But if you have a conversation with them, right, they have nothing to say. So they have nothing to say. They just came out with more splitter of their nonsense. The Gemara says this that person shouldn't continue in the dispute. It is a prohibition to perpetuate a dispute, and one must initiate the reconciliation, even if he is in the right. Still try to stop machlekes. The Ramban enumerates this as one of the 630 mitzvahs. According to the Rambam, it's one of the mitzvahs, but the Rambam does not count this as one of the mitzvahs. But nevertheless, everyone agrees. It says in Torah not to be part of a machlekes. The question is if it's one of the 613 or not. Okay. Rav Ashi adds that a person who stays in a machlekes is fit to be afflicted with tsaras. Rav Ashi Emiroi leads stareya. The person who has machlekes should be afflicted with leprosy. How do we know? Because it says here about the story of Moshe and Korach said biyad Moshe loi. There's a word biyad, and we learned that when Moshe Rabbeinu was kind of saying something a little negative about the Jewish people. What did he say? That behem lo yaminu bi, they wouldn't believe me. So it says vayem Hashem lo yoid hevi nayatcha b'chekecha. Put your hand into your cloak, and Moshe's hand got afflicted with leprosy. So from here we see that yad, hand is like a gezer shava. That there was a connection to that there should have been leprosy. And then they were killed, but they shouldn't. The person who's involved in machlekes is a person that should be afflicted with leprosy. We also find, by the way, it's not so simple. I'm not sure why they don't quote it, but we know that over here he brings down the Marsha says that this verse that says you shouldn't be like Korach and is talking about specifically also a person is not allowed to argue on the kahuna, on the priesthood. If a person claims that why is Aaron the priest, which is really the story of Korach, so there it says that Moshe Rabbeinu's establishing the house of Aaron as the priest of the Jewish people, it says Kasher Dibra Hashem Biyad Moshe Lo. That God said to Moshe, this is who's going to be the priest. And he uses the word Yad. And we know the hand is connected to Tsaras because Moshe himself got leprosy on his hand for accusing the Jewish people of not believing him. And from this, the Marsha says we learn, it's like a hint that there's an idea of leprosy in the kahuna. Where later in history did we have this? That a person was struck with leprosy because he fought on the Tsaras was King Uzziyahu. King Uzziyahu was from the house of David, was generally considered a good king. And again, good people do mistakes as well. And King Uzziyahu was so excited about the holiness of the temple that he wanted to be a Kohen Gadol, and therefore he went and he sacrificed the sacrifice of Ketores. And when he did it, there was a tremendous earthquake happened in Eretz Yisrael. They say that was like before the earthquake, after the earthquake, that was like a huge event in Jewish history, in at least temple times. So much so that when we talk about Mashiach coming, it says there's going to be a rash, there's going to be a noise like the noise in the days of Uzziyahu. And afterwards, Uzziyahu, after this big earthquake, and Uzziyahu was a builder, so I'm assuming there's also a lot of his construction was damaged. Uzziyahu was afflicted with tsaras and he was dethroned. He couldn't be a king any longer because he had the tsaras, he had the leprosy, and he got the leprosy because he was trying to be a kohen. So we see clearly that it's connected to kahuna as well. Rabbi Yossi says, "Kol hacholik al malchus beis David." Whoever tries to fight against the house of David. Roi lakich. So we're talking about people that are fighting. So if we go off into other ideas, Roi lakish should be should be bitten by a snake, because it says Vayizbach Adoniyahu Tzainu Bakar Umari Im Even Hazaycheles. Zecheles is the crawling creatures. That Adoniyahu, which was David's son, at the end of David's life, we learn about it in the Haftarah of Chayesara. That's in the beginning of Kings. That Adoniyahu wants to crown himself king, kind of to rebel against his father, but it really was aimed at Solomon. He wanted to make sure that he inherits David's seat. That's the whole story with David with Bathsheba. And prophet Nathan Hanavi, at the beginning of Kings, you could open it up and read it, but it says over there, learn about it. Adoniyahu went and he sacrificed. So he was fighting against even though he was himself a descendant of David, but he wasn't king. The king was supposed to remain to be David, then it would be Solomon. So Vayizbach Adoniyahu Tzainu Bakar Marim Evan Ezecheles, by the place of the Evan of Zocheles, it says, Im Chamas Eichli Offer, and also says about it's brought down with the position of crawling things of the dust. So this idea of zecheles, what crawls on the dust, is a snake, so it should be bitten by a snake. It's kind of alluding to the idea of what Adoniyahu did. Also, when it's brought down, I think the Mashal says, why specifically a snake? There's other crawly creatures, right? There could be a scorpion and other things. So it's brought down because the king also was meant to be the king of the snake was supposed to be the king of the animals before the sin of the tree of knowledge, right? The snake, what made the snake be the animal that fought against Adam and Eve was because he was the king of the animals and felt that he should also be the king of the world. So because that's something that a snake would do, that's involved in something about being a king, so therefore the snake he should be bitten by the snake, or at least learn from the snake that you shouldn't do things, you shouldn't step over boundaries. All right. Rab Chizda says, Kol ha'chelek al rabbi, a person who has a disagreement with his teacher or her teacher, k'chelek al shechina. It's just like having a disagreement, the person who's being starting fights and disagreements with the Lord. Like it says, B'hatzaisem al Hashem. The Torah says, even though they went against Moshe, it's as if they spoke against the Lord. Amr Rab Chama bar Rab Chanina, Rab Chama, the son of Chanina, says, he quotes another verse. How do we know that if a person gets into a disagreement, a fight, with his quarrel with his teachers, like a quarrel against Hashem? Shenemra says, "Hey, May Meriva, these are the waters of quarrel. These are the waters after Miriam passed away. These are the waters that Moshe Rabbeinu was challenged when the people came and cried about water at the end of the 40 years. Asherov b'nei Yisrael Hashem, that they fought with Hashem. They didn't fight with Hashem; they fought with Moshe. But because they were fighting with Moshe, it was as if they were fighting with Hashem." Chelek al Rabbi, Chelek al Yeshivasei. This person is fighting on his teacher. Though they're fighting against Moshe and Aaron, but it says when they're fighting with God. Why? Because they're fighting with Moshe, they're fighting with God. Meriva is more a quarrel with words. So like they did words against Moshe. So it's like words against God. They continue. Rab Chanina bar Papa, Rab Chanina the son of Papa says, "Call misraim al rabbi." If a person is resentful to his teacher, right? Resentment. So we learned about meriva and chelek. So Rashi says kind of a katata. Meriva is katata is the kind of, he says here, quarrel with words. And chelek is to strove against the Lord. So here we talk about misarim. Misarim means to be resentful to your teacher. It's keilu misraim ala shechina. You're resentful to God. Shenemar, like Moshe tells the Jewish people in the early days, he says, "Lo yaleinu tlunai seichem kim al Hashem." Why are you having complaints against us? Your resentment is against God. Amar Rabbo, call mahar rabbi. A person who questions his teacher or her teacher. It's like you're questioning the Lord. The people spoke against God and Moshe. What's it means against God and Moshe? If you're speaking against God, then what do you have to add Moshe? Because they spoke about Moshe as if they spoke, because they thoughts, they questioned, so to say, this suspected their teacher. So it's as if they suspected Hashem. What does it mean, Misraim? A person who feels that your teacher is being achzari, cruel to you, right? Your resentment towards them. So sometimes a person may think God's being cruel to you. So if you think your teacher's being cruel to you, as if you think God's being cruel to you. Mahare mechapel of dvarim. Okay. He says, is suspicious of you're again, it's words of you're thinking about your teacher, that your mahar, you wonder if what he's doing is correct. So here he's going to bring down the Ramah. Hold on a second. He says, before we go to, it says over here, the Marsha says, the Yad Ramah, says, it doesn't mean that the people, when it says to call them harach rabbi, the person who questions, so to say, their teachers that question God. It says, of course, the Jewish people didn't question God, but because they questioned Moshe, as if they questioned God. Also, what's the proof? Is if they if they question God, why would they question Moshe? Why would they, if they're already challenging the so to say the master, why would they mention the student or the Eved, the servant? So therefore, we see clearly that it was focused at Moshe, but it was Hashem considered as if they were questioning him. Rabbi Steinzal says, some explain the proof in the following manner. The fact that the verse mentions not only the sin that they committed in speaking against God, but also a sin against Moshe, right? That's the Adrama, indicates that the sins are equal. Were this not the case, only the more severe sin would have been mentioned. Rabbeinu Yonah of Lunal. Another explanation given is that it is inconceivable that the people would have doubted the divine presence. Therefore, when the verse says that they spoke against God, it is apparent that their speaking against Moshe is interpreted as they're speaking against the divine presence as well. Although they didn't mean it against God, but that's how God considered it. Okay, so this is kind of, we went off a little bit to this whole idea of people challenging their teachers to challenging Hashem, Moshe being challenged by the Jewish people, the suspicions they had of Moshe. Now we're going to talk about a little bit more about Korach himself. Korach is known as to be one, there's an expression, I don't know if anyone heard of it, there's an expression called Reich vi Korach. Before Rockefeller, or before, what is it, I don't know what they called, the Jewish family that's very wealthy. So they used to always say, rich like Rockefeller or rich like the
Rothschilds.
Thank you, Barbara. To be rich like the Rothschilds. So it used to be an expression, rich like Korach, because Korach was considered
and also like a rich like Bloomberg, like Buffett, and all these
that's more recent.
Yeah.
So back in the day, it was rich like Korach.
Yeah, true. Yeah.
So it says it's an expression, Reich vi Korach. So what's the verse? What's the foundation? How do we know that Korach was rich? So the Gemara tells us over here. It says that we quote from Mishlei, I think. It says, Oisher Shamar leBa'alav leRa'asai. Wealth is kept for the owner, but leRa'asai, it's not for his good. Amish Lakish, what is this referring to? Is that Oisher Shakorach? His wealth kind of led him astray. The wealth of Korach. And it says about all the Yakum, what is the substance that were by their feet when they were swallowed up by the earth? So Amr Abelazar says, Adam. This is a person's money. Shemamida Ragle, that puts a person on their feet, or either really, or at least the person feels that there's something of stature because of their success. So Moshe also, the wealth of Korach is what was his downfall. Lira'asai. Why? Because he was wealthy and he wasn't happy with his wealth. He wanted more. Right? The person, Mishesh Lemana writes a Messiah. One who has $100 wants $200. Rab Levi describes how wealthy was Korach. It says Masay Shloish Meis Prades, that he had a weight that carried 300 white mules, carried Maftechais Shel Beis Gznazav, that carried the keys of his treasure of Korach. Not just his treasure, but the keys of his treasure. V'kula aklide v'klipe de gilda. And they were all locks of leather. Some understand it to mean that locks of leather means that they weren't heavy. So he didn't need the Mercedes, the Hummer to carry the keys, but it was an expression of his wealth. Others say that the reason why he used Pradis Levanes, white mules, is because it's brought down in the Gemara somewhere. I forget where Rashi quotes it, that the kick of a white mule, you don't recover. It's very, very severe. So it's basically like a watchdog, So anyone who would try to steal Korach's wealth, they would have to face these mules that were very aggressive. Okay, but either way, we see that he was very wealthy, right? Like Korach. We'll see in a second where he got his money from. You wonder. He was a slave like everyone else. He was a Levi. He wasn't a slave because he was a Levite, but still, he lived in Egypt. But he came out Reich vi Korach. He was Korach. He was very wealthy. He had all these mules just carrying the keys of his safe. It says, Iklide is the mafteches, is the keys. V'kalufa is minalim, is the locks. It says, the gidlei kulam ha-mafteches v'amenulam shal or hayu. The keys themselves and the locks were made of leather. So they were, v'af b'kein hayu shleish meis prudes toines. So even though they were light, leather's not heavy, it's like it was metal. But he still, he was so wealthy that, he had this whole entourage of, imagine in the desert, you have 300 mules just carrying the keys of Korach. Lashon acher the galta letzorich sakim hamitzarfim v'kisin shalar hayu. Whenever he had sacks made out of leather, but either way, he was carrying. It shows a wealth that he had in abundance. Ikli is keys, glida is leather, aklidi is also keys from a Greek word. Okay. So we see basically that he had a lot of money, and because of that, again, the money didn't help him. It didn't do good for him. The Rashbam, Rashi's grandson, says the number 300 is not. It could be a bit of an exaggeration. He says whenever you see the number 300 in Shas, it's just to make a point, but the point has been made. He also quotes the Gemara Chulin that says that the reason he had them carried on these white mules is because, like I said, anyone who gets a kick from one of these mules will never recover. So therefore, basically, they were like watchdogs. Okay, Amar Rab Chama, this is the famous Gemara. Gemara says, I think there's this whole Likutei Torah on this from the Alter Rebbe in Parshas Vayechi or Vayigash. It says, Amar Rab Chama bar Rab Chananina. Rab Chana, the son of Chanina, says, Shalosh matmonias hitim Yosef b'Mitzrayim. It says that Yosef gathered all the money of the world. So Yosef was himself super wealthy. Yosef a tzaddik. We're talking about Yosef, the son of Jacob. So there was a famine in all of the world. Everyone came and paid whatever the price was. They gave everything. Everything was given to Yosef. So Yosef had 3 treasures, and he hid all 3 of them. Achas niskal sel Korach. So now we have the answer. Where did Korach become wealthy from? He found one of those 3 treasures. So he became super wealthy, right? He had 1/3 of Yosef's wealth. V'achas niskal sel Antoninus ben Asverus. The famous Antoninus, which was the Caesar in the time of Rabbeinu HaKadosh. It says that Shnei Goyim beVitnech. Rashi says that when Rivka comes to ask Hashem, her great-grandfather, why does she have this child inside her that's kind of running all over the place? In the shul he runs, into to the house of worship he runs, to the house of Avodah Zarah. So the answer is, he said, you have 2 people inside you, you have twins. You have Yaakov and Esav. Yaakov's going to go to Torah. Esav's going to go to the house of idol worship. Yaakov's going to be a studious person. Esav's going to be a murderer, right? So but the Rashi also quotes Shnei Goyim is also referring to Rebbe and Antoninus. The 2 Rebbe and Antoninus were the 2 wealthiest people of their time, and so Rebbe was, of course, the author of he was the Nasi, the house of the Nasi, and he was the descendant of Hillel, and he was very good friends with Antoninus also. It says why was Antoninus close to Rebbe? It says that when Rabban Gamliel, which was Reb Shimon ben Gamliel, he was the father of Rebbe. When his wife gave birth, because they were the house of the prince, they were close to royalty of Rome. And at that point in the Dor Shma, it was after the uprising of Bar Kochva. One of the things were that they didn't allow for circumcision. So they circumcised Rebbe, but they didn't want him to check. So they switched Rebbe and the babies. Antoninus went to the wife of Reb Shimon ben Gamliel. He was a baby. And Rebbe went to the wife of Antoninus' mother. So to Antoninus' mother. So because he nursed from Rabban Gamliel's wife, Reb Shimon ben Gamliel's wife, so he had a taste, so to say, of holiness. So he gravitated to Torah. According to some opinions, Antoninus converted later. But he studied Torah with Rebbe. So either way, how did Antoninus himself become very wealthy? They say he was super wealthy. He found the second of the 3 treasures that Yosef hid. And the 3rd treasure, this goes to show you that Korach can't be taken so lightly. Neither can Antoninus be taken lightly. Because when are we going to find the 3rd treasure of Yosef? So we're not just talking about a physical, material treasure. There's something holy about this treasure as well. Obviously, it belonged to Yosef Tzaddik. We know that Yosef was even greater than the fathers in his gathering the sparks. That all the work that had to be done in Egypt, most of it was done by Yosef. So all the sparks of holiness that was in material things was found by Yosef, and he hid it. One was given to Korach. Korach was overloaded with money and holiness. Right? You got overwhelmed with holiness, and therefore, but didn't do him well. Antoninus was a righteous person. But the 3rd treasure is going to be revealed to the Jewish people, to the tzaddikim, to the righteous in the coming of Mashiach. So V'achas, the 3rd one, Genuzal tzaddikim lasad lavi. Rashi, so Reb Steinzal says, who's Antoninus? Again, we have a lot of stories of Antoninus and Rabbi. So perhaps it's reference here to Antoninus, son of Septimus, that better known as the Palcatin, Carcelia, I don't know, who reigned in Rome during the years 212, 217. He's renowned for granting citizenship to the residents of all provinces of the empire. In addition, he was known for spending enormous sums of money. Obviously, he found one of the treasures on gifts for his soldiers and on lavish buildings. So he was a very wealthy king. Where did he have his money from? Now we know he had his money from. He found one of the three treasures of Yosef. Now this is where because Korach is not to be taken, so to say, so literally. First of all, we learned that Korach saw greatness coming from him. Like we learned Yeravam ben Nevat, right? We said Yeravam, the son of Nevat saw greatness. We had the whole Gemara we learned in that. People that saw greatness in their descendants. Korach saw greatness in descendants. He thought it meant him. Who was it? Shmuel, the prophet. Samuel, the prophet, the one who anointed Saul as king and David as king. So Samuel is a pivotal part of the Jewish history. Aside from being part of the tradition of Torah and a great leader in his own time, he establishes the house of David. Aside from all the other things that he did in helping design the Beis Hamikdash, all the Levites we learned today in Rashi. Everyone opens up Chumash Rashi today for Wednesday. You see that the Levites, their scheduling was all scheduled by Shmuel, Samuel, and David. So Samuel, he saw Samuel, right? Shmuel. So he saw greatness coming from him. And where did this greatness come from? Because Korach had greatness. It was misplaced. Therefore, Rabbi Yochanan says, Korach lo min habluim v'lo min hasrufim. He wasn't swallowed up or burnt, right? We find two punishments that happen in the camp of Korach. One is the whole camp was swallowed up. Moshe says God should open up the earth's mouth and swallowed up. The 250 that tried to sacrifice, they were burnt. So the Rabbi Yochanan says he was neither. He wasn't burnt or swallowed up. How do we know he wasn't from those who were swallowed up? He was killed for sure. The question is if he was killed in a plague or if he was punished like those who were swallowed or burnt. So Rabbi Yochanan doesn't say that he lived, but he wasn't punished in that way. It says they swallowed up all the people that belonged to Korach. Lo Korach, but not Korach himself. So the people that were part of Korach's entourage, so to say, they were swallowed up, and not him. Not from the people that were burnt. How do we know? Because it says it says the 250, but Korach was on top of the 250. Because the verse says you, Aaron, and 250. So it means Moshe wasn't part of the Korach wasn't from the 250, so he wasn't burnt either. So Rashi tells us, don't think that he lived. He died in a plague, but not punished like the others. We'll see the commentaries that say that the reason he wasn't, that Rabbi Yochanan feels that way, is because his sin wasn't as great as the other people's sin. Lo Korach, Reish Nun Hoy Levad Korach. You have to say that the 250, Reish Nun is 250, the number value of 250, were aside for Korach, because it says Chamishim Masayim Machtois Ve'ata V'Aaron Ish Machtose. It says 250 pans that they used to try to sacrifice, then you and Aaron with their own pans. So it's 250 plus 2, so it's 252. But the 250 that were burnt, Aaron wasn't killed, and Korach wasn't burnt, according to Rabbi Yochanan. So, yeah, because it says, he says over here, the reason that Korach was not punished with the others, according to Reb Steinzatz, quotes, of the Ein Yaakov, that Korach himself did not sin to the extent of the members of his assembly sinned. Why? Korach erred that he deemed himself worthy of leadership, something that cannot be said about the members of his assembly. Like Rashi quotes the Marsha Rashi. Alternatively, his punishment was diminished due to the merit of his descendants who were luminaries, among them Samuel, the prophet, and the sons of Korach mentioned as singers in the Psalms. So he had great children. Even the sons of Korach were great. Because of that, that protected him a little bit, according to the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan. But the Mishnah disagrees with Rabbi Yochanan. Masni Satana, the Brisa learns that Korach min asrufim umin abluim. He got both punishments. He was both burnt and he was consumed. Why? Because according to the commentaries, that if he would just be burnt, then the people who were swallowed would say, he started the whole thing. Why does he get burnt and not swallowed? And if he was just swallowed, the people who got burnt would say, why did he get swallowed and not burnt? So he got both. How he got burnt, the Medrash says that a bowl of fire came and pushed him to the opening of the ground. Rashi learns that he was burnt and then his body was swallowed. Korach min asrufim umin abluim. The Brisa disagrees with Rabbi Yochanan. Min abluim, how do we know? Because it says vativ la'osim es Korach. There's a clear verse that says that he was swallowed up and Korach was also swallowed up. Another verse. Minasrufim, how do we know that he was from the burnt? It says, "V'teitze eish mufnei Hashem, eish v'yotze meis Hashem, v'toichel tzchamishim u'masayim ish, v'korach ba'dayu." Korach was there also. So according to the Brisa, he was there and he was burnt. So we'll see how Rashi figures out the argument. Rabbi Yochanan basically has a different, learns that the verse is saying, attributing to Korach, doesn't mean that he was burnt or swallowed, but he was also punished. But the Brisa takes it more literally. Min hablum min asrufim. Haya shenisrfa nishmasi. So Rashi explains, how could he be both? Again, the Medrash says that a ball of fire came and burnt him and pushed him all the way to the opening. But Rashi says, shenisrfa nishmasai, his soul was burnt. We know that, like Nadav and Avihu, when they died, it says that the fire went into their bodies stayed whole. It was just their soul that was burnt. V'guf kayim, his body remained. Maybe the others, their bodies were also burnt. And afterwards, his body his body rolled until the opening. V'nivla, and he was swallowed. Like it says in Parshas Pinchas, because we have a verse that supports that he was swallowed. Imam. So Rabbi Yochanan, who quoted an earlier verse that says that those of Korach, meaning not Korach himself, so what is he going to say? Lo min habluim, lo min asrufim. He puts the pause in the 250, and Korach with the people that were killed in the plague. So he was killed in the plague, but not in the swallowing. V'korach ba'adayu, min d'chsiv v'teichas chamishim masayim ish, ma'akriv akteris, v'korach ma'akriv akteris havet, d'chsiv chamishim masayim machtis atev aron, ish machtase. V'inam v'es l'rabis korach imarim. So Raj says either because that everyone was burnt besides Aaron, or the fact that it says S is to add the like it says v'toichel es hachamishim u'masayim. The S is to add Korach was also es l'rabis. We have that in Torah. Like as a kabit es avicha v'es imecha. It says honor your father and your mother. So the S is to teach us achim hagadol. A person should honor their older brother as well. So we have a drasha, we use the S. So it says es Korach, es chamishim masayim ish. Who's the addition to the 250? That's Korach. Min asrufim min habluim. Rashi, the Reb Stein that says, again, so the Medrash says over here, again, that the reason why he had to get both was because like this, no one should say that he got off easy. He started the rebellion. And Medrash explains that this was done, not like Rashi, so that both of these burnt, both those who were burnt and those who were swallowed would be unable to complain that Korach, who caused them to sin, was not among them. The Medrash explains that he was burnt among those who burnt the incest, and the fire rolled him to the opening of the earth where he was swallowed. Okay, Rashi says that the difference was soul and body. Omer Rava says, continue. What is the verse that teaches us in Habakkuk that says Shemesh Yareach Amad Zavula La'or Chitzachi Halechu, that the sun and the moon stand still in their habitation, which is Zavula, but also Zvul is the highest level of the sky, at the light of your arrows as they go. What does this mean? Malamed, that comes to teach us that the sun and the moon came to God and said, what's going on over here? You have Moshe Rabbeinu. Korach is evidently the rebellion of Korach was considered more severe than most of the other challenges that Moshe had. Moshe had challenges from people, weak, scared, greedy. Korach was on a very high level. Was very threatening. Like said, Moshe Rabbeinu, he felt this was a major rebellion, major challenge to Moshe's leadership. So Melamed she'alu shemesh v'reach l'zvul. It says that from this we learn. The Gemara says that the sun and the moon went up to the Zvul, which is the highest level, so to say, in heaven. They said to God, Rebbeinu Shalom, Master of the universe, if you're not going to make right, so to say, to the son of Amram, referring to Moshe Rabbeinu, whose father was Amram, then, if you're going to make judgment for the son of Amram, then we're going to go out and do our job, which is to bring the sun and the moon to shine, etc. Then they're protesting, right? We live in an age of protesters. So the sun and the moon also protested. They said if God is going to protect Moshe's honor, good, we'll do our job. If not, we're protesting. We're not going to do our jobs. So what happened? God was like, whoa, time out. God had to throw spears at them. What was God saying to them? The fact that people worship the sun and the moon, that doesn't bother you much. You don't have no mecha. You're not protesting. All of a sudden, when it comes to Moshe's honor, you are protesting. Now, if you could say that, hey, says from this you could learn that they're wrong, but or you could learn that the sun and the moon did what they did. There was a concept of protesting for Moshe's honor, notwithstanding the fact that they didn't protest for God's honor. This is b'chvoidi lo mechisa, b'chvoid b'asav v'dam mechisa. When it comes to God's honor, you don't protest, you don't go on strike. But when it comes to Moshe's honor, you do. And the Gemara continues, finishes off, and it says, and today the moon and the sun do not emerge until they are struck, because we'll learn why. One opinion is they're struck because God punished them. The other one is because they said to God, you're right. If we're the cause of idol worship, we're not going to come out and shine. So God has to force them now to come out to shine. They threw the book back at God. Shemesh Yerech Amid Zvula. It says when the ground opened up and swallowed the people before that. So it says the sun and the moon went up to the part of the sky, which is called Zvul. Shishmoi Zvul. V'amar Kadosh Baruch Hu means he reached the high point. And he said to God, that if you're not going to fix what's going on over here, you're not going to show retribution to Korach for what he's doing, we're quitting. We're not going to go out and give light to the world. So God was upset at them. Every morning we learned in the Sanhedrin, right, earlier, that the kings, as soon as they wake up, the kings of the east, they put on their crowns and they bow to the sun. They worship the sun. So Rashi says, nowadays they don't come out until God, so to say, throws the spears at them. So say they were punished. Hamakim Kain Shemati. This is what I heard. So one explanation Rashi says is that they were punished because they were respectful to Moshe's honor and weren't concerned about God's honor. So they are punished that God throws the spears at them every morning to get them to go do their job. Another idea is that they realized that God was offended. They said, oh, we didn't realize you're offended. Now that we're aware that you're offended, bro, we're not going out. You're right. So therefore God has to force them to go out. But there's an idea over here. There's an idea over here. It's not the place to elaborate it, but there's an idea over here about what the sun and the moon did. It's not so simple. There's a concept over here that there's a concept of a Rebbe, there's a concept of a Nasi, of a Moshe Rabbeinu, that the sun and the moon says there's an order, there's a Seder, and for this they were ready to withhold their job of giving light. And when it came to God's honor, they said, listen, you're the master of the universe, but when it comes to Moshe Rabbeinu, we're not going to go out and shine until you make right to Moshe. All right, we'll leave it at that for food for thought. Darish Rava says, what does it mean? Moshe says to God that if there's such a thing, that you should that if you have to, but if the Lord creates a new creation and the earth opens its mouth, right? So what God said to Moshe said to God, if you have a hell, mutav good, then build it, make it. You see, also Moshe wanted. We don't find this kind of punishment in any other rebellion or challenge that Moshe faced. Was nothing like this. Nothing like this. And if you read the Torah afterwards, right? What does it say? Afterwards, they came the people to. No one ever takes lessons. Nothing has changed. And literally, you think people learn from the hate that was 2 years ago. Is back happening again now. The same things that we dealt with Erev Rosh Hashanah 2023 is we're dealing again now. No one learns anything from our mistakes. So the rebellion of Korach came out, and the Jewish people see the world. The ground opens up. The fire comes in. They had the staff that showed clearly Aaron's the leader. And what they say, Ata Mesim as Adas Hashem. You went and killed God's people. Another plague. But we see that they were called God's people. That Korach was something. This was a very vicious story because of the greatness of Korach. So Darish Rava, so he says. So here he says that he tells God, if not, creates a new type of hell. If you say that God should actually create a new hell. There's nothing new in the world. Right? King Solomon says, there's not this idea, nothing. The idea of Ein Chadash Tachas Hashem, which is nothing new, is not just that God doesn't recreate new things, but nothing's changed. People haven't changed. Our attitudes haven't changed. Same, we deal with the same issues over and over and over again. Just they manifest in different clothing, different ideas, but it's the same ideas over and over again. El Kroive Pischa means that he says if it's not near, move the opening here. Right? They say there's a Rabbi Steindatz. We're learning Rabbi Steindatz's Talmud. His explanation of the Talmud, his translation of the Talmud. So when I first came to Israel, so there's a place called, it says that King Chizkiyahu, by his father, was sacrificed to the. Remember, we learned about he was sacrificed to one of the idols by Gay Gehenim, by the opening of Gehenim, the opening of Gehenim. There's a concept of the opening of hell. Where's the opening of hell? So this Rabbi Steinzot says it's on the way. What's today it's in the valley of Gehenim. It's still today called Gehenim, which is by Sultan's Pool. If you're going down towards Shar Tzion, there's a place called Gehenim, and that's the place where they say the opening of hell is. So they had the opening of hell also in the desert. Moshe says, move the opening of hell to open up the ground so they should be swallowed up. Rashi quotes, Ein kol chodesh tachas hashemesh, that Shlomo Melech says, there's nothing new. V'yi gehenim lo ivri, if there was no hell, ad ha-hu shaita, until this time, ha-v'lei chodesh, so then it would be something new, and you can't build a new hell. So it's not that hell was new, but the opening of hell was new. So it says, the kroive pescha sheyikariv pischa shel gehenim v'tiftach ha'aretz b'makim shehem, that you should open up the gates of hell, move it towards where the Korach was, so that they could be swallowed up immediately. Again, this is not to be taken 100% literally. When I mean not to be taken literally, it's obviously, people go to hell, they go to hell, they pass away, they go to hell no matter where they are. But the idea is there's the concept of the opening of hell, the gates of hell, or the Gehenim, the gates of Gehenim. So Moshe wanted that to be near where Korach was swallowed up. Based on the Gemara's conclusion, the term Beria means the perforation, means the hole, the opening, as it is written, and stab uvera them with swords. Okay, stabbing causes perforation. Okay, now we learn that the Torah tells us. Okay, there's just to back up a bit about the sun and the moon. The idea that the sun and the moon said that they're not going to shine unless there's judgment of Moshe. They say, what do you mean? If by doing that they take away free choice. And if any time the sun and the moon protest when someone does a sin, so then there's no free choice. That takes away free choice. But the idea is that there's free choice for individuals, and when there's a community kind of setting, there's sometimes an opportunity for the schusim of the community to kind of help them make the right choice. Okay, it says. Hold on, let's get over here. Okay, now we're going. The Torah continues. Let's just finish off over here. The Torah continues later in Pinchas when it talks about counting the Jewish people. It says Ubnei Korach lemesu, that Korach's children didn't die, but the Torah says clearly they did die. So what does it mean that the Bnei Korach lemesu, the children of Korach, didn't die? Tani Moshe Rabbeinu. We learned from our teacher. Second, let's see if anyone quotes who that is. It doesn't say what that is. I'm not sure if that means Rebbe or Rav. The Mokim is Batel Lehem Begehenim, that they had a special elevated place in hell. Someone once told me that there's a Rashba that says that the ground that they weren't swallowed means the ground opened up. There was these little islands created for the sons of Korach. Why? Because they repented. When the ground closed again, that's what it means. The children of Korach, number one, is if Samuel is a descendant of Korach, means that they continue to live, right? Otherwise, Samuel couldn't be born. Second of all is we have Tehillim, we have Psalms of the sons of Korach, which was written after, obviously. So we have so there's different ideas of how they had children afterwards. I think we discussed this in the Gemara earlier. So it says, Moshe Rabbeinu Omer Makim Nisbatzelem Begehenim. They had a special a place fortified for them in hell. V'yashvelav Amr Shira, and that's where they sat and sang Shira, they sang praise, which is the Tehillim. Amr Rabba Bar Bachana Zimna Chada Havik Ozli Borche. He says like this: Rabba, the son of Rabbi Chana, says he was once going on the road. He was once walking in a path, means kind of alone. Amr Lehu Taya So it says a certain Arab came to him. We find this before many times in the Gemara. Not sure if it's alluding to an actual person or if this is Elijah the prophet or someone in that line. But either way, this Arab tells the Rabbi Barachana, Tov achvei beluye de Korach. I'm going to go and show you where the people of Korach were swallowed up from. Azul, so he says he went to follow this guide. And Chaza trei b'zi dahava kanafik kitra minayu. So he saw two, so to say, holes in the ground that smoke was coming up like heat. Shaka gavava. So this Arab took took a little bit of the amra, and Amshimai took his spear and he took a little wool and he drenched it in water. And he put it at the end of his spear. And he put it over the steam. And Ichrach, it was burnt. That's how hot it was, even though it was drenched in water. Amrli, so the Arab fellow says, to listen to what you could hear. And he heard that the voices from this place, which was the opening, which the sons of Korach were, they were still there in hell saying, Moshe v'tarase emes, Moshe is true, his Torah is true, v'heim badayim, they, meaning he, the people saying are liars. That's what it says. It's brought down that when they were swallowed, they were saying Moshe emes v'tarase emes. Nispaser milashin ir b'tzura hiskin lehem HaKadosh Baruch Hu makom goiva shleihemiku kol kach b'gehenim v'leimesu. Rashi says, what does it mean that he gave them an elevated space in hell? Evidently, there's deep hell, extreme hell, and light hell. So the higher you are, the less heat you have. Nevertheless, that was still hot because it burnt the wool of this Arab's that the Arab put over the opening. But nevertheless, it wasn't as hot as other places in hell. And it says, so he made a higher place. So they shouldn't get so deep in hell, and they didn't die because of that. Taya Seicha Yishmael. Rashi says, what's a tire? A Yishmaeli is a reference to an Arab's merchant or a traveler. He went and showed them where Korach was swallowed up, to Rabbi Bar Bachana, right? Who was this? Rabbi Bar Bachana. Rabbi Bar Bachana, I believe, didn't live in Eretz Yisrael. He lived in Bavel. But he saw a hole in the ground that smoke was coming out. He took a little piece of wool. He soaked it in water. Here it says that every 30 days they go back to hell. Kind of, there's a process. They recite praise to thank God for the fact that they did not die. That's what the Yavit says. Although it is said in Medrash that they initiated the argument, they repented and gained an atonement. Okay, so therefore, let's go. We have 2-3 more minutes. Let's just finish this little piece. Hold on, just go to the end of the page, the beginning of the next page. Amrlei, so he said, the Arab said, Kol tlasin yamim mahadilu gehenim kibasib b'tei chalachas. So every 30 days, the Gehenim returns to them like meat in a kalachas, is a very hot pan, a cooking pan. And they keep on saying, Moshe is true, his Torah is true, and they are liars. Every 30 days, hell comes back over here. So he said that he goes back and he says every 30 days this opening opens up again, and the steam comes out, and I guess he examined to make sure it's still hot, and he hears that they say Moshe is true and his Torah is true, and they're liars. So from here we see that we can't finish the piece of Gemara. We'll have to finish the next piece of Gemara next week about the generation of the desert. But so they did tshuva. The children of Korach did tshuva. Again, I'm not sure after the himself, maybe Shuk, you have a better memory than me in these things, in all things. But I think we learned that about the sons of Korach, how they had children. I think that was about Hanani, Mishael, Azariah, maybe. But that they had children, obviously the Gemara says clearly Shmuel and Navi comes from, we learned that Shmuel Navi comes from, Reb Steinsaltz quotes Shmuel and Navi comes from Korach, there's the Bnei Korach, but nevertheless they got punished, but not to the extent, and they survived this whole ordeal because they did tshuva and they acknowledged Moshe's rule. The next piece, we're going to just go into the next piece next week, which talks about the generation of the desert, the question if they had that the whole generation of the desert has a portion of the world to come. We see two extreme views: the view of Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Lazar, which we learned in the Mishnah, and then after that we reach a new Mishnah that's going to teach us about the 10 lost tribes. Right? That's the question we all have: are the 10 lost tribes going to come back when Mashiach comes? Well, thank you everyone for joining, and have a lovely rest of your week and a good Shabbos and a good Chodesh. Take care.
Thank you, Rabbi.
You're welcome.